Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you are all doing well on this fine Saturday afternoon, evening, or morning, wherever you may be. And it's kind of really relaxing to finally just do a stream where I'm talking to you guys rather than having a guest on or anything like that. I have been rather negligent in that respects, I think, into doing things with you guys or solo work because the last 2 weeks have had me incredibly busy, kind of traveling, also on other appearances and recording things with other people. I think, as we talked about on the Digital Archipelago earlier this week, that it's just been a nonstop barrage of being doing anything but things that I usually do. And in fact, someone on Twitter had asked me about it. And so I thought with today's stream that I would cover. I have a short talk prepared for you all, and then after that, I would simply break into where I'll be going with things like this, because there's a lot of stuff that I want to do in the future, and you guys will get to be a part of that. So let me go get my camera turned on here in a second. Let me make sure that it's not my crappy webcam and the one I actually use when I'm on air. Here we go. Yeah, open that. Thank you. Perfect. Okay. But yeah, so I hope that you're all doing quite well. Things have been, like I said, rather busy on my end, but it's good to just speak with you all. So today's talk, as you can tell from the title, is called Paper Trails and Futures. Maybe I'll have the algorithm, throw some econ people my way, wondering what on earth am I talking about, and instead get hopefully a heartfelt discussion on things to come and things that have certainly passed. So as the description implies, I'm going to put my friend Focron on blast because he's a patron, but also a friend of mine who I met last year at the U.S. Sealdings event IRL. My conversation over lunch with him was probably one of the more highlights of my time in Nashville, because that time last year I was, that was the first big social gathering I went to post-transplant, and I got sick as a dog afterwards. So right there at the very beginning, it was a lot of fun to just speak and meet with people. Mr. D's Cocktail Hour. Yes, if you're on Twitter, our good friend Mr. D of Academic Agents on Popular Opinions co-host, he is quite the voracious talker well into the late night. So the Cocktail Hour street spaces he does on Twitter are quite entertaining. But to get onto the topic at hand and the things that have been running through my mind as of late, so he recently gave me a gift. He had sort of messaged me and he says, "Oh, by the way, I sent you something," because he and I will share things back and forth. I had bought him a small little icon to hang up on your Christmas tree during the holidays. And so he had sent back this little gift, and you're probably not going to be able to see it very well with my camera, so I have an image put up on screen. But he had sent me some old paper currency from the Confederacy. They're in little plastic slits here, so I'm going to just show the image that's up on here that I have saved so you guys can see it. But this was what was shared with me as a gift. And so it's next to some places that I have some old coins that I have available, some pre-war American currency, some, some East German currency as well before the wall had fallen down. I have some marks as well as some other pre-Euro currency as well. I don't have anything too ancient. I have some, although I have had the pleasure of holding Russian imperial currency before the Bolshevik Revolution, courtesy of a lady of ours at church. But, he had given me the state of Alabama 25-cent paper currency alongside a state of Louisiana $3 right here. And right next to it, of course, that I have, it's on top of my Bible, but it's also next to a 1943 Liberty dime, Winged Liberty, with little fascis on the back of it. And it just sort of was this odd moment of history because as I've sort of jokingly referenced an illusion on other streams and in other things that I've talked about, I do have family that goes more or less back to the beginning of the country. I do have, I think, some distant relative that was on the Mayflower originally, although plenty of my family has definitely moved south and, became part of the Anglo colonization of Texas, what you called Texians before the Texas Revolution. And more or less has stayed here on my mother's side. One of the family reunions I went to last year in 2022, there's a distant great aunt of mine who's very big into genealogy. And it's, I think, a very American thing because, if you're old stock European, I suppose, like you have an aristocratic crest or a family name that has been around for forever that you can trace to. With Americans, I think it's just a tiny bit different. And so you want to know where you came from. What European or ancestral roots do you bear to? And so, we can go back to a French lineage that, came across to the British Isles during the William the Conqueror and the Battle of Hastings, and then eventually became these very strange Protestants that moved over to the United States or the colonies at that time. But, he had given me this as sort of this piece of history. And he jokingly said, I'm sure these have depreciated in value, although at the rate the current economy is going, I don't know how true that may be. Maybe they'll be worth more sometimes. I just checked eBay. The 25-cent paper currency here goes for like $29. So hey, there's value in this, right? I'm hodling, as they like to say in the crypto community, but it was a very sentimental gift, not because I'm a big collector of old coinage or old currency. I don't really have a collection towards anything, but it was deeply personal to me because it was a piece of history. There was a period in time in this country where secession was very much a likely thing to be discussed. I always find it interesting when people sort of call the South traitors, or that they call them these losers in 1865, losers in 2023 or whatever. And we'll just ignore the Hartford convention, where there was discussion about rich New England businessmen wanting to secede to preserve their own economic and political interests at hand. That's a discussion for another day. But he had given me this, and I thought to myself that this is very real. I can hold this. I can see this. I don't have to go onto a digital database to find them. They weren't all completely destroyed, and that it's a tangible item in front of me that I can hold, examine, look up the history. So the one that you see on screen, right, is number 55438. The one I have is 78183, paying to the bearer to Treasury notes, State Treasury of Confederate States of America. And I couldn't help but think to myself, what a tangible and physical piece of history of the country, as well as a tangible and physical piece of history of my own family line. And that was what sort of hit me. And it was very deep, that it made me want to give a discussion on this. And so, this is a paper trail, as the title implies. These are paper trails to heritage. They're paper trails to things that have gone before you, much in the same way that my great aunt's, thicker than Bibles kind of, genealogy book that she carries around and that she works on and that she researches into and makes calls across the country to find out who knew who and who was distantly related. It makes you really appreciate the fact that those things physically exist. We're not really, we are a country like any sort of country or any sort of civilization that still adheres to some kind of oral tradition. You'll hear this with old stories from your grandparents or great-grandparents if you're lucky to still have them. And, I think that those are really worth writing down. I was with Scott Mannion a few weeks ago, recording with him, which you can find on his channel. We sort of talked about localism and ruralism, and that if you drive through a place where I live and you can go to this tiny little community center in my town, which is really nothing more than just a nice large sheet metal building that takes up a half-acre lot, but there's records of everything from the town's founding in the middle of the 19th century. And it's really appreciative of the fact that all of that history has been preserved and that it's documented. And I have taken pictures and I've made copies of some of the things that exist, because a lot of my family lives in this area, and turns out most of them have lived in the area since the very beginning, at least on my mother's side, and those that are part of her family and her extended family. And there's this tangible paper trail of what exists, and that they're very real. Now, we know, of course, that they're subject to the elements, right? I live in an area where tornado warnings are prevalent, where tornadoes have touched down. I mean, storm shelters, things are likely to get destroyed. This is why it's so important to digitize records. But there's a physical manifestation of history that exists in papers and records and tax forms. And, things were going on in the middle of the Civil War, in the middle of local cholera pandemics or other diseases, and people still went about their business. One of the most interesting things when you start looking up historical records, whether through like a university library search or just even perusing on the internet with digital archives, is that even in Europe during the times of the Black Death, you could look up records of what people were still doing. People were still born, people were still dying, not just of disease, but also old age. People went to church, people got married, and people still had to go to court, pay their taxes, and sue some guy because, of a land or a territorial dispute over an easement in France. And there were very real things that were going on in the midst of the worst of times. And that we have a paper trail to illustrate that no matter how bad things got, there was still a record of existence. Now, of course, in the digital age, we still have that record. It's harder, I think, to find as the internet has certainly evolved. One only needs to look up how difficult it is to find, websites that have aged out of existence, or, do geosites from like those old Yahoo Messenger days still exist and things like that for forums. And, there's a Usenet archive that has contained more or less all that existed when the Usenet stuff was still around. But, those things are just like old films from the silver screen that were very easily flammable. They're quite easy to be lost in the same way that even, minor distractions or subcultures over video games, right? Where there's the Flash animation, the Flash game restoration project, where people are trying to rebuild or reconstruct and try to do it. It's this form of digital archaeology, which is quite impressive to say the least, but it also illustrates how fast technology has moved. And so here I am holding this piece of currency for a nation that has not existed for 150 some odd years now, 160 years really, almost. And that, these were things that were probably used by ordinary people or people that conducted business or people that worked in banks and trying to make do in the midst of a bloody conflict for independence and a sense of heritable rights from one generation to the next. And there was a discussion I had with Andrew Isker at Boniface Option, one of the co-authors of the Christian nationalism book by the Gab fellows over there with Andrew Torba and the rest of them. And, one of the things I told him that really stuck out to me when reading the Reflections of the Revolutions in France by Edmund Burke was this concept of inherited rights, which today sounds so bizarre, but, when he's calling out the various problems of the revolution, he says, well, how are you one to, modify the rights of those that have been, who have gone before you, who live with you, and have yet to be born? And I've always found that to be a fundamentally profound thing, even if it sort of works within that Lockean concept of rights. But nevertheless, I can't help but think to myself that these things exist for a reason. That, this is part of who you are. You can't escape that. In the same way that when people talk about class consciousness in America, or they talk about where their families come from, especially if you live out more in the South, they'll ask you what kind of family you're from. And if you say from who or from where, they may ask you, well, are you part of those outlaw, XYZ, and stuff like that. And families like that tend to go way back. And sometimes you have to shake those generational bonds or shake those curses that sort of you carry with you. Whether you know it or not, you're born with a certain amount of weight on your shoulders and your back. And when you do so, that weight on your shoulders and back tends to be alongside your name or the decisions that you make and a reflection of others. And those things seem to be very lost nowadays because things are so digitized, individualized, atomized, and deracinated. Everything is okay as long as, both parties can consent to X, and that we don't really need to worry about the consequences of others. We don't think about the greater whole of things. And I think that's also manifested itself in ways, not just physically, but the digital as well. We live in a world where we're not just looking through the looking glass anymore. We also live in the world we see through the looking glass. We have a foot in both this world and sort of in a mirror darkly, so to speak, in the world in which we live on our phones. And I don't think we're going to leave that anytime soon. I don't think that an army of Ned Ludd 3.0s are going to emerge out of the woodwork and start going out of their way to display random GPU clusters out of the way. I don't think that Yudowski's concerns are actually going to be made manifest. But at that same time, this sort of behooves us to think about the future, because we talk about sometimes the discussions of like archaeofuturism. I know that there's some lads in the UK that have jokingly, but it's also tongue in cheek in the way that I think they actually truly endearingly mean it, about some kind of Anglo-futurism or some kind of return to Art Deco and things like that with city planning and architecture, which all sound good in nature. But again, they are aesthetics without praxology. They're aesthetics without any meaningful way to accomplish those things. Even, Lou Templar, formerly known as Cringewalker, has the whole other Twitter account dedicated to something called like the Holy American Empire, where like if the HRE existed in the United States and it was this more confederal style monarchy wherein the king would make an impassioned speech about morality before the House of Representatives and then meet with the bishops and things like that. And it offers this world of like, well, what if the South was, what if the South won, but it was like incredibly like Episcopalian and it's just started ruling over things. But again, they sell a nice image, they sell a pretty painting, and they sell a sense of emotion, a sense of nostalgia, a sense of things of where that world never came to exist, and you're nostalgic for something that never happened or never came about. And they're salves, I think, or even worse, some kind of drug wherein you can punish yourself. But, I hold these tangible things in my hands. I hold a coin where it's a winged liberty, although the helmet kind of reminds me of the Greek Hermes. And these old paper currencies from territory as a part of a country that doesn't exist but has been reintegrated as part of a greater union project. And at the end of the day, I realized to myself that those things are very important to us, and that we've lost a great bit of deal, especially in the post 1980s onward, this sort of great digital revolution that has come about. And I can't help but think to myself that there's a reason why nostalgia is so powerful in this particular point in time, especially inside of the right, but also just in general for Generation Z, whatever comes after them. I don't know what they'll be called. And, millennials that grew up in the rise of early internet forums, internet culture, and now exist in a totally different environment where the internet was something that I would have to physically commit to. I'd have to sit down. I'd have to make it work. Can't be on the phone and things like that. To where now it's with me at all times and in all places. Better finish that coffee before it gets too cold. But one of the things that, why I find nostalgia to be so prevalent and so powerful, and it's not even because I'm like pro nostalgia. I'm actually really not. I think, though, the reason why we're so nostalgic now and the reason why, the distributist and I have these back and forths on our own respective streams where he'll mention something I put up and I'll mention something that he puts up. It's kind of funny because we don't really talk to each other. But, he had said in relation to my essay, Everywhere at the End of the West, which is about, everywhere at the end of time and a little bit of realism, where he had said, well, there's too much nostalgia on the right. And I agree with him, there is. But I don't know if, and again, I would have to speak to Dave about this, and maybe we should have a stream on it. But I don't know if he gets it, especially for people that are about 10 years younger than him. And I'm about 8, 9, 10 years younger than Dave. I think he can see 40 on the horizon. I can see 30. And, I grew up, and especially myself, and I think a lot of other people sort of like me, where you move around a lot, or that, you're instantly uprooted from all sense of culture, understanding, and belonging, because you're now in a world where you're hyper-stimulated at all times. You are on a 24-hour news cycle that updates literally every, millisecond, depending on how fast you hit refresh on the Twitter feed or your other forms of social media. And people are desperately looking for answers to things. And this is why Turnip's video on the Zoomers is so important, because people will literally burn themselves out into these empty, charred, shattered husks of humans, desperately trying to find something to anchor themselves to, whether that be political identities, consumer identities, all different types of religion, holistic spirituality, homeopathy, whatsoever. And they've lost all instances of what their traditions are behind them. I grew up as a military brat. I grew up living all over the world in Western Europe, in which I have a strong appreciation and love for. And I really dread, if I ever go back, what it's turned into in some places, especially where I grew up. But I look at these things and I realize that there is a connection to things I can't really get past. And that is that my, family served in the Confederacy. It, played a role in judicially executing Union sympathizers from the, Texas territory and state. And, but those things happened, and we can meaningly and sort of tongue-in-cheek sort of talk about those things, especially when anyone brings up the Civil War or brings up World War II, where it's always done in this juxtaposition of how can I crush my political enemies. But the reason why I think we're nostalgic in this sense is because most people don't know what they were connected to, or most people have no memory of what a lineage, a paper trail of legacy looks like. And so when they find these things, and I think this is why men, just in general, are far more likely to be history buffs. I try not to get involved in a lot of Twitter drama, but I couldn't help but notice my friends who helped translate the classics or talk about ancient Greek works. They were mocking on some woman who's like, I have a PhD in like classical history, and these people are just mogging me on Twitter. And she's got like the most stupid take on Homer possible. And of course, people are going to harangue her, harass her, because one, that's how basic assumption groups work on the internet. People are going to defend their cult's personality online. And also, why not own someone that wants to give you a homoerotic or some sort of liberal, interpretation of the Trojan War. And so, they're nostalgic for things because they're rediscovering them for the first time. There really is that much atomization. There really is that much mindlessness. But at the same time, where I do agree with Dave is that it does require a bit of realism and a bit of adulthood and a bit of maturity to recognize that as much as we can appreciate what has come before us, we also know that it's gone, that we live in an intrinsically different environment. And so, I've ranted and raved on nostalgia before, and I don't want that to be a reiteration of the stream. So I want to use these things that have been given to me, these gifts, these recognition, the self-cognizance, the self-awareness of the fact that those things are long gone, right? You're not going to get some kind of Confederacy 2.0. I don't know how likely national divorce is, so I'm not really going to entertain that stream for today. But I could not help but think to myself that, okay, we're fundamentally aware of the problem. I think that the right has been fundamentally aware of the problem in this space for quite some time. But there's two main things that are really pushing at each other back and forth time and time again. One is that if you look at culture in the United States especially, and so by extension the West, what gets culturally exported out as part of the United States' big, exports, which is its foreign policy, which tends to be, it's taking like the rainbow flag as the cultural victory option in a game of civilization. But really what's driving all of this is primarily like, startup culture, this like tech culture, tech bros in general. I mean, one of the most popular political thinkers today is the Silicon Valley tech bro, Curtis Yarvin, in the same way that someone who wanted to have a post-structuralist interpretation of technology to come is also very popular, Nick Land. And so that sort of drives a lot of the political discussion. There's a lot of political theory that is out there today. I'm currently, annotating and making my own commentary and notes on the network state, written by an Indian gentleman that wants to talk about the newest form of how we can attain sovereignty inside territories that are already sovereign, and how we can be recognized externally abroad by other like sovereign network startup, cultures. And so, you see this a lot. Like, look at things like a CEO, look at things like a tech startup. And it's, I don't know how valid this economic interpretation is, but, someone had made a point that I wonder how much investment has happened into the Silicon Valley tech revolution after 2007, because, you have historically low interest rates. And so why not make money for nothing on projects that may not make a return on investment or may not actually make money? I mean, it hasn't been until Elon Musk has bought Twitter and fired a bunch of people to try and maintain a semblance of profitability with an institution that has never done it, in the same way that I don't think YouTube really makes as much money as I think Google wants it. But, the value in it isn't the financials, it's the power and the access and the way people make careers from it. And so in this moment of self-awareness that I'm completely digitally deracinated, that we're sort of uplifted and uprooted from a lot of things. This is why I, spend so much time telling people to appreciate nature and appreciate what's outside their windows, especially with their neighbors or local politics, is because we find ourselves in a strange world where most of the culture really has been pushed by Silicon Valley. And I'm not talking about like comedies or anything like that. I'm not referring to, Silicon Valley based, groups or television shows, although, stuff like that exists, this interest from talking about the history of things like Halt and Catch Fire, or more recently about, tech startup, individuals being on criminal trial and things like that. And all these sorts of media projects really do focus on them. But our entire form of culture today is algorithmically generated. It's not randomly generated. Sorry, VeggieTales, but it's algorithmically generated. And in that turn, right, where you see people kind of, they think they're being so edgy when they say like your entire personality is just an algorithm, bro. You clicked on one video and everything that you're doing is all about how, you clicked on one thing, you watched another thing, and then all of a sudden that's your personality. And to some extent, there's probably there's some truth to that, obviously, but at the same time, the person probably calling that out also has their personality algorithmically shaped, or that they are so desiring social agreeability or to be a part of the mind of the masses that they'll also be algorithmically inclined in terms of their personality. And so when you look at how this operates, which is this like rather tragic world that we live in, you find yourself wondering, well, where do we go from here? And I think that that's been the primary concern for a lot of people that work inside of tech and outside of tech. And this is where I want to transition the sort of conversation of there's a very real heritable legacy that we have, but we're also aware that it's been lost. That's why there's so much nostalgia, to a degree that we've overreacted and that there's too much. But now at the same time, you can't let go of that. But we also are cognizantly self-aware of the fact that there's a lot of things being thrown in our way, in terms of being overly stimulated. Our culture is being manifestly held hostage by how algorithms work, how our networks are maintained, who can control access to information. And in turn, you have this disruption. The line is no longer what it was in terms of, we are descendants from X, Y, and Z, but now there were these new individuals, almost as if, the Morlock and the Loy are really coming to form here, although we're nowhere near the future in which H.G. Wells was discussing, thousands of years in the future. Whereas now, there are people that know how these things operate, know how they can control them, and then you have consumers and individuals that sort of exist in these spaces that are sort of dependent on them. And so it leads to this awkward culture where those that work in those spaces, oftentimes not from this country, especially in America, like how H-1B visas work and things like that, that are so fundamentally foreign that of course they're going to look down on them. And at the same time, they're going to look down on them for either their dependence or their power. Those things are just a fundamental part, I think, of how American politics work, whether we like it or not. But Silicon Valley is a big driver of culture. But this sort of brings the discussion now towards the idea of a future. And I think that future is the thing that everyone's got on their mind of what shall we do, or what shall we eat, or how we're going to make do. And of course, right, there's plenty of people that have addressed this, and that I think I want to spend the considerable length of time in the future sort of taking a look at these answers. There, of course, is sort of the Landian accelerationist take on things where, we should embrace it. We should embrace this concept of, Anglo solemn providence, akin to Milton and the rest, and see where it takes us. And maybe we'll, break free out of it through the destruction of the current system. There are others that, say like Palladium Magazine or others, and I would probably include Curtis Yarvin in this instance, that say that we should embrace this for the technological capabilities that would allow us to ingratiate ourselves with some kind of decentralized sovereignty where we can exist even as things get bad. Although I think that fundamentally ignores a lot of things of how bad they are on the ground. Just look at what happened in New York City earlier this week. And then at the same time, you have more, return to pastoral lives, or we must completely destroy everything. We must be complete Luddites. in the midst of this, neon god that we're about to create. In this instance, either like the Yudkowskis of the world, where we must destroy random, GPU clusters that are being exhibited out there, which is very Nick Bostrom-esque, where it's like, well, I see a brave concern with like the vulnerable world hypothesis, artificial intelligence or general artificial intelligence could definitely be doing this, or large language models could destroy us, so we must cease projects. To some extent, I'm sympathetic to that take. However, I also recognize that artificial intelligence will be a lot like nuclear weapons, that it doesn't matter about what your position is, right? Like, even if you decided to take the Australia route with artificial intelligence, right, with nuclear weapons, say like Australia, you're like, no nuclear power, no nuclear weapons, we are a completely denuclearized state. That's not going to stop the Chinese or the Americans or the Indians from developing artificial intelligence or developing nuclear weapons. And now you're surrounded by nuclear armed countries more all around your border, save Antarctica, although who knows, right? And so, and at the same time, you have someone like Paul Kingsnorth, who is very concerned about what this might do to the soul of a man. And his 4-part series on the internet, which he's been writing, has been very good. And I highly recommend that you read it, even if you disagree with him. I think that he offers some interesting observations on the human condition, on what we've done to ourselves. Because one of the things, especially if you're a religious individual, I think of the idea of Antichrist not as an A-N-T-I, but A-N-T-E, before Christ, or in place of Christ, in place of the building, in place of this antechamber, antebellum, antediluvian. So Antichrist, in this instance, where, we've put ourselves before anything else. We've put ourselves before the internet. We've put ourselves before social media. I mean, pride made manifest along social media and those sort of K lines of thought, and kind of a worrying thing to think about. And so I feel, and this is my general opinion, because I have a relative trust of my audience, I like to think that you are smarter than the average bear, that you are smarter than the average Joe, that we're going to be all right in this respect. We're all self-aware. I don't mean that we're all going to be all right. I don't think all of us will be. Maybe you're not all right now, but everyone is probably listening. Everyone listening probably has a general idea that, yeah, things are bad, or things are going to get worse, or that we're cognizant of the fact that we live in this culture that seems desiccated, where things are, we have to rehash old things to ensure that the current progressive narrative exists, that the meta-politics of the world has to be rooted in some kind of spiritual anti-fascism. Although if you ask someone what that word even means, you're going to get a million different definitions. This is why I highly encourage people to read Dr. Gottfried's book on anti-fascism, A Course for Crusade. It's very good. I'm writing about it, actually, for Chronicles Magazine. And that, if we're self-aware of the problem, the same question that has been put before everybody, and it's a conversation that I think I talked about with Mr. Patriarch when I first got started, 2.5 years ago, was, well, what do we do? Or where do we go from here, right? That Lenin question, what must be done? And very funny that Lenin asks that question, and now we're all also same time on the right, cultural conservatives, Christians, pagans, whatever, everyone's trying to answer this question in the midst of, well, not everyone is tech savvy. Everyone has different skills. Some people are manual laborers. Some work as data scientists. Some work as grant writers. Some work as X, Y, and Z. And again, a lack of cohesive narrative on what we're to do. The environment for patronage and money is all, we got to elbow each other and push people out of the way, because the right sense of collectivity is, of course, diametrically different and also opposed, really, to how the left operates in respects to the West. And so, you have people that, want to talk over each other to make sure that they get the biggest bang for their buck. But at the same time, they're all gravely concerned about solutions. So it doesn't matter if you're a humble book merchant, if you sell rare and spicy books that people don't read anymore, or if you're someone that, can make beautiful music and perform concerts and people. Everyone in the back of their mind knows that, well, we don't know how bad things are going to get, but we have a pretty good idea that they aren't going to be getting any better. And we're self-aware of this. We, have these ideals that we live to and adhere by. and that these promised dreams of liberalism to contain the worst elements of ourselves has clearly failed. And these worst elements of ourselves usually are the spiritual children of liberalism in a lot of respects, or reactions to industrial revolution style liberalism. I think of Marxism. And of course, what is a reaction to Marxism but fascism in a lot of respects? And I'm being broad and I'm being generalistic there. I think there are other channels that have done a much better job of the history of fascism than I could ever give you. But I can't help but think to myself, okay, the subject now is what must be done. And this is where there was a great tweet by Cody Browning about this issue. And I want to see if I can pull it up because it's quite good in this respect. And I'm going to see if I can find it because I had retweeted it as well. And but he was poking at the movie The Martian, right, with Matt Damon, where he says, I have to science the shit out of this. And he he had said something along the lines of like, when right wingers are presented with problems that actually require action, and it has that thing rephrased, and it says, I have to theory sell the shit out of this. And I certainly I certainly find that to be hilarious because in a lot of ways that's definitely true. It's very funny in that respect. But yeah, let's see if I can load it up for you guys. But if not, right, I think that everyone kind of understands that there is that sort of problem in that respect. And now you get to the question of, well, what must be done? On one hand, right, like there's always going to be a commentariat class. There's always going to be things that are doing online and you can talk about them. I agree with what the distributist is doing in respects to, well, we should probably move ourselves in a direction that enables us to do, how to survive and how to build out and report on it. And so one of the things that definitely comes to my mind in this respect is that, Dave's pushing of things in the real world, things that we are doing IRL are going to definitely be more important than ever before. And that's just going to be the way that it's done. And again, people say this all the time, do things IRL, have conferences, be activists, etc. And it feels very similar to what a lot of like lefties will tell you, especially like I think about like the Occupy Wall Street rhetoric, like, we just have to get on the ground and let them know how serious we are, and the power structure will listen to us and things like that. I'm not referring to that at all. What I do mean in this respect is that I'm going to try and outline these in 3 steps. Is that one of these things that definitely has to be addressed is the simple fact of the matter that our approach to activism and our approach to, changing power structures, what works for right-wing goals is probably not going to work the same way it does for the left, because the left knows that whatever it believes in or that it does is usually tacitly aligned, if not outright originating from the power structure, because it enables them to go in the direction that they need them to go to. So, I think about, no one painting or putting oil on top of the glass in famous paintings like that. No one gives a shit, right, that they're doing this, because everybody knows that, they want sort of climate futures and carbon neutral goals to already happen. We see this from the government. They just want to be the accelerant for it, and that they can make things more unpopular and that they can hate them, but it doesn't. And it's a nice distraction from the fact that, it's not some ugly, 2 out of 10 looking woman that's smearing oil all over herself on top of like famous paintings. No, it really is like the guys in charge up there and things like that. And even to a point where some people are actually beginning to question it. There was that great article that Skeptical Waves narrated talking about Bill Gates from a mainstream publication about what kind of influence he has. And you're like, So I in that respect, what I mean is that our communities are going to be much smaller, and that a retreat to the hinterland or a retreat to the monasteries is not going to work for everybody. The Benedict option is a rather incomplete book by Rod Dreher. He doesn't sort of tell you what the answer is, other than to retreat to the monastery, form these covenant-esque communities, but he doesn't offer any win conditions. It's a very unfinished work. But he's right about a few things in that book. Is that if you are a a Christian, regardless of denomination, tradition, church that you may belong to, you believe, you go to church more than once a week, you're active in your community, you are very much likely a minority. And you need to work within that network and build up trust. However, he doesn't tell you what the option is to go forward. And I think that you're beginning to really see this in sort of the Reformed Protestant side, where there is talks about Christian nationalism in the United States because, well, there were state churches at the beginning of the nation. There were, anti-blasphemy laws on paper, and now we've got a wicked, twisted world where, we can have Satan, satanic panic-esque, story hours with a guy dressed as a demon or Satan, under the First Amendment, but public prayer is banned. So I think everyone is fundamentally aware of how the power structure operates and that you're going to be dealing with an uphill battle. So one of the first things that definitely comes to my mind in this respect is that our activism or whatever that we may do has to facilitate on ways in which generate trust, capital, and some form of anti-fragility. So, I mean, like what Bennett's Phylactery has been doing with the quote-unquote, exit organization that they have. Those are things that really do come to my mind in this respect. And these are things that are quite good. And, I finally found the bloody tweet. But anyways, those things definitely come to my mind about the future. But this does not mean that we throw out the past entirely. When talking about nostalgia the last time I was on the air, I had this wonderful gentleman sort of message me. And he had given me a lengthy discussion or some thoughts to sort of chew on this. And so, I won't say who it was from, a much larger account than myself, but I think some of it in a Christian perspective definitely gave a lot to chew on and has influenced a little bit of this discussion as well. He says, especially in these circles, we see a longing for the past, whether transposing a medieval monarchy or 20th century European state or a Russian tsardom in 21st century America, getting lost in fantasy situations without looking at what properly ordered, virtuous American state would look like within the American tradition itself, perhaps drawing from old forms, but synthesized as something new. The same cultural endeavors in art, the idea of some marble bust avatar and statue posting, but what would a new form of that art look like? Hearkening to the same principles that made it beautiful in the first place. What about a Roman statuary reflected in the internal beauty, and what form would that take today in the 21st century in 2023? Even within the church tradition, the apostles were given the fullness of the faith at Pentecost, with scandals and heresies arising throughout the centuries. The councils and saints never invented new dogma, but reiterated the eternal truths of the faith in new words appropriate to the times and addressing the controversies of the faith. Instead of monarchy is good and we should remake it, what eternal truths or principles does monarchy reflect that draws to it? The same with art or anything else. To put on your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created in the likeness of God, in true righteousness and holiness, quoting from St. Paul. In terms of humanity, both gender and humanism movements, attempt to create a new man that transcends humanity. People desire to shed their former selves, an imitation of baptism and rebirth in Christ. The men of old, the heroes and saints of the past serve to inspire us, but what would the saints of today look like? Each age produces its own, relevant to its particular struggles, so what does the new man of today look like in a kaleidoscope of false idols and temptations? When the mirror of the self is shattered and broken, how does man discover his true reflection, and who should he become? That's what we should ask and search the depths of it. And so that's the message that he sent me. And I wanted to read that out loud because I thought it was a very good question. The gentleman who sent it to me, as well as myself, are Orthodox Christians. But I think that still applies to anyone who's sort of looking at the de-atomization, individuation, and purposeful self-demolition of the West. And one can only hope that those questions can be answered by someone on these sides. And so those are the things that I want to tackle with respect to the future. I think that synthesis is going to be the second part of anything that we do towards the future. This technology won't go away. And I've talked about it, and I'm in the talks with a few other people behind the scenes, but I am someone who's not very literate when it comes to coding, programming, or how these things operate. And I think that if I'm going to survive in the coming decades ahead, I mean, I'm only in my late 20s, I should probably know a thing or two about how that stuff works, and that we should be acquiring the skills and the armor of knowledge to ensure that we know how to survive in this work environment. If, for instance, ChatGPT is going to be this powerful LLM that they say it's going to be in respect to the job market, you should probably know how to get around that, or to have a job that has enough technical skill and expertise, either that or working in the trades, that ensures that you can make do for yourself. After all, one of the greatest problems that I think that the right has right now, outside of a few people, based on my experiences about capital acquisition, a lot of us are all middle class guys of various ages trying to make do. But we also need to ensure that those skills that we learn ourselves can also be passed down to the next generation. So that brings us to the third point, is that whatever future that we decide to have, anti-fragile, trustful, they're going to be incredibly scaled down by the nature of how things are deracinated and atomized. We have to use that to transcend ourselves towards a new self, a new community, a new man, that is rooted in our respective traditions, rooted in our respective heritage, culture, ethnos, while at the same time capable of producing work, capital, and means that can generate power. And so the third answer will, of course, the third point, I think, towards looking towards the future is that inside that synthesis and inside this trust, we'll have to develop a sense of understanding that is intrinsically both tangible, physical, I mean, like this paper, but also at the same time digital. Some people don't back everything up and will lose themselves to things like that. Or some people will quit the YouTube politics game and their work is destroyed. Hundreds, if not thousands of videos, essays, and whatnot destroyed. And sometimes just scraps of them are survived by channels that re-upload them, or fans that were disappointed to see their work disappear. For instance, there's a great video on the history of lynching in the United States that only exists because some channel wanted to preserve someone else's work and re-uploaded it. And so you can't help but think to yourself, well, that's sort of depressing. I hope that there's a written copy somewhere or a typed up copy on that dude's computer. Even though it's just a political video essay or something like that, like that's still something that you wrote and did. And you don't want that to be lost due to a banning or something like that happening to you. And so, at the end of the day, this also requires, I think, a mindset that isn't abhorrently anti-human. We see enough anti-humanity on a day-to-day basis in front of us all the time, right here and right now. And that's already pretty shitty. Whether that be, people telling you openly to your face to accept, assaults and drug addicts and crazy people on the subway, because that's just the part and parcel of living in a big city, as the mayor of London has said. And now that odious woman who is on the Majority Report with Sam Cedar, which is already an awful, awful show as it is, that really, you exist in a world where, progressivism is anti-civilization, because in their viewpoint, civilization is both fascistic and white supremacist. And so those are the things that you're going to have to deal with. And so these sort of traditions that you're going to have to inherit or inhabit are vital to surviving, because what is tradition but other than answers to perennial problems? And if you're a Christian, then what is answer to eternal problems but then Christ? And so those are things that I think that one should keep in mind when talking about political projects for the future. And so whether you are looking at old paper currency or you're looking at old family photos, the future also must be preserved through oral tradition as well. But it also has to be written down. I mean, for instance, so much of the works of St. John Chrysostom, a great Bishop of Constantinople, but also was a great priest, his homilies were preserved because people wrote them down. And that's how we have access to them. And you can look them up and read them. But at the same time, right, I think about my grandmother, who was born in 1939. And, she's in her mid-80s now. And I'm now hearing stories about what life was like growing up as a child, what was it like to be a teenager in the 1950s. And those things, of course, are from an age I have no connection to, no memory to. Not that I could say I'm nostalgic for them, but it's a world that once existed, and that one should hear those stories, and one should be able to record what the geography of their towns are like. Much like in my little tiny city hall, community hall, there are a treasure trove of records preserved since the beginning of the town, 160 some odd years ago. And so, as I sort of draw near to here, this discussion, I'll open it up to super chats and check on you guys because I haven't been reading chat too much. Sorry, gents. I can't help but think that there are physical paper trails that are part of our legacy, and that there are meaningful actions of what people build. And I think that that's what is going to require you to ask a few questions. Because as our friend Conscious Caracol wrote in the American Conservative, whenever there are demographic but politically like-minded concentrations, you can build power for yourself. Because people will know when they come by you that they are an outsider. They are not, they're just visiting. They're not permanent, And so I think that the order of magnitude in terms of just making friends and networking needs to increase by a well order of magnitude than what it currently exists now. I think that for all this talk that people do online, we are grossly behind on things that need to be said. I think that people need to follow through, as people like to say they need to, or as even leftists like to say, they need to do the work. You got to do the work. You got to be better. And so you've got to. I think that call kind of rings true even to myself. I didn't basket weave as much as I should. Although I am building connections with other individuals, whether that be at New Founding, which I do believe in their mission. Those guys, I think, really do want to provide ways of employment and ways to invest in projects that aren't going to be toppled by your enemies. The only thing that does kind of concern me, of course, is the Conquest's 3 laws about right-wing organizations, but we'll pray and hope that maybe they have some sort of future proof on that. I mean, we can go back to my talk. I didn't even ask that question to sort of their one token non-waspy person at the office, Santiago. So, I mean, you should listen to that if you haven't. But all these things come to my mind as we look at these things, is that, yes, I have a heritage that goes back there, generations since the beginning of the country. No one can take that from me, and I shouldn't lose it willingly to this digital atomization and deracination that exists. Breaking bread with our neighbors is good, especially if you can trust them. You have to be aware of your surroundings. I'm not saying this works for everybody. And that when we talk about politics, we mustn't fall into the illusion that despite as much theory as we talk about, that the grand political meta-narratives that do exist, but for the average ordinary person, it's really, really about, well, who can I bitch to get this pothole fixed? And so we must be cognizant of where we can influence ourselves, where power does exist, and that we have to start building in ways that will guarantee sort of this synthesization and connections to people that we may not like or that we may not want to talk to in that respect. And it's going to always be awkward and difficult because sometimes we really are going to end up talking to people that we disagree with or talking to people that we don't like. But at the end of the day, we have to materialize things that recognizes that we're not going to build the next Art Deco cathedral, because even if you build it and say they do come, Field of Dreams style, what inevitably will turn out, I think, in a lot of respects, will be some kind of, is there belief behind it? Is there faith behind it? Is there a sincerity and drive to actually accomplish the missions that you have set out? Because I can't help but think of the quote unquote new right that gets talked about in like Vanity Fair or in the New York Post or the dime square stuff in the New York Times, where, how much of this is performative because you find right-wing, conservative, traditional, reactionary ideas transgressive, hip, and trendy, and that, are you wearing the church, are you wearing tradition as a skin suit because it makes you feel good rather than you actually believe in these things and have not? And on one hand, I shouldn't be so dismissive of it because perhaps a cultural trend in the other direction is always good. And at the same time, right, St. Cyril of Jerusalem talks about this in his catechetical lectures, that if you've come to faith for other reasons, say a woman or how pretty the church is, or there's bread and a meal afterwards, well, congratulations, you have fallen into the net of fishermen, as Christ said in the gospel. Who knows? But, I don't put a lot of trust in it. Maybe I'm just a naturally skeptical, cynical person. I like to say realist. A lot of people call me a cynic. But those are the things that I had on my mind today, and that I will wrap up this little talk with just a few announcements. I know that it's been a while since we've done Prudent Observations. It will be coming back, and it's not disappearing. I have been working on editing some video stuff for a different intro, as well as making a video clip for the Frog of the Week stuff. But also because I don't want to just have that be something where I do like an article reading and we react to it, or we interrogate this article from JSTOR or Foreign Affairs magazine. But I do want to put together researched topics that can hold up. So if someone were to ask, right, like one of the things that I am researching and writing up on is the concept of the Davidson window in respect to the United States, Taiwan, and China. I want that to be a well put together hour-long lecture that people can listen to and appreciate, and can go back to as a good available resource in the same way that other streams have done so, whether that be the discussions on offensive realism, the bargaining model of war, rational choice theory and international relations. I like those because I think those have held up, and I want that quality to stay consistent. So I've been very busy these last 2 weeks, and it's been absolutely insane. Between my outside appearances on Orrin McIntyre twice the other week, Academic Agent. This week, it's been with Newfounding. I recorded with CJ Engel for Chronicles Magazine. I had Jeremy Carl on just the other day on Wednesday. And that, of course, the Digital Archipelago is an ongoing weekly thing. So I'm trying to reorganize my schedule alongside trying to read more, consume less online, and to better myself. My workout is usually in the morning. I do a lot of stuff, a weighted vest. And so there's a lot of internal betterment things that I'm working on that I don't want to give you guys something that's half-assed or of poor quality or something that I want to revisit again. Even if I get something wrong, we will revisit it again because I want to improve this trade and craft of mine, I guess, which is offering some kind of lecture and education that I think is worth your time. Because, we as Americans especially are oftentimes geographically illiterate, or that we don't have a greater understanding of countries, regions, ethnicities, and peoples whose history go back hundreds more, if not thousands of years longer than America's. And so, most of my audience is American, and I think that's a good thing to provide. So we will return with Prudent Observations next week. We will be writing more on Substack. I have a lot of essays handwritten that I need to transcribe, and that I need to finish my 8,000 words for Chronicles Magazine on the Gottfried piece I'm writing, and that I also need to finish up a lot of the other essays and poems for the book I want to publish, hopefully by the end of the year. So I've got a lot of stuff going on. Your ongoing support has always been appreciative of that fact. We'll be reviewing Alan Bloom's Closing the American Mind on the 20th of May. I have my calendar right here. Sorry, guys. And yeah, there's plenty of stuff going on in the future. So that's what I have wrapped up for this little discussion. I'm now going to go through the chat and open it all to questions. If you don't want to give Raja Mohan any money or Google any money, then of course the Entropy link is the pinned link in the comments in the chat, but it is also down below in the description. So I'll leave it there. But now we'll just go out of there. Yes, a far-right workout regimen. Yeah, I mean, well, like a true autistic person, nothing like a weighted vest, right, to keep you to keep you going, right? I think those are the things that I was doing there. But yeah, that, and if you're a channel member or if you're a Substack or Subscribe Star supporter, I have some like gaming stuff in the background that you all can enjoy. Yeah, I know. Be better. That was hilarious. Oh well. But yes, hello chat. I hope everyone is doing well. I'm not holding my breath either, 99 Iron Duke, although I did watch clips of the coronation this morning. I haven't seen the entire ceremony just because I live in the United States. But, you know, I'm inclined to agree, and I'm sure that we'll get a lovely essay from Morgoth about the coronation in the coming weeks and turns like that. So yeah, I'd imagine that we'll see something like that in the futures. Yeah, Frito, you're absolutely right. I'm not going to put that one up on stream, but I do wholeheartedly agree that apparently, you know, supremacism and supremacy is things like that that are difficult to accomplish in a stable society. I'm estranged from my family and live on another continent, so identifying with family history is difficult. Oh, yeah, and I mean, this is the thing that I think is going to happen with a lot of people is that sometimes we take on traditions, or that we find tradition, or that we find greater teleological purpose and meaning that isn't necessarily identifiable with the spirit of the age. So, you know, I have my own family squabbles over politics quite often. I have a brother that I disagree with on a lot of issues quite often, and I try very hard not to go ham on those particular issues because I disagree with them. But I think that doesn't mean that we can't acknowledge that there are basic fundamental truths about the world. Hegeliani, I think in that respect, right, that when we come across difficulties or challenges like that, that we have to be sometimes we have to look at ourselves as frontiersmen, especially in an American context. I don't know where you are, what ethnicity you are, where you're from, but you know, the West has always been a place where we have tradition, we have our own respective nations, and that we settle. You know, there's a reason why Western Europe conquered the world for a reason. Those are things that people should keep in mind, and maybe that requires us to do. And now I'm seeing people arguing in chat. You know, nostalgia is both good, but it can be cancerous. You know, just like a cell that grows too much out of control, it can be particularly bad. So yes, I hope that all enjoy that debate, I suppose, in that respect. My brother got a nose ring, and I am utterly crushed. I knew film school would ruin him fully. Well, there is hope. There's hope in the world in that respect. There's hope. And sometimes, although it is funny because, for instance, the gentleman that has done my lovely profile picture, you know, this lovely frog right here, is by a Brazilian gentleman who does all the thumbnails for the OGC, and he's done some artwork as well. He's done the banner for my YouTube, and he's also done a lot of the artwork for my merch. You know, he's got a nose ring, he does yoga and whatnot, but he holds pretty conservative opinions. And so, you know, I'd hold out hope, and we should not hate our brothers in that respect, even though they are family. I know it's always difficult. Also, I wanted to share the tweet that Cody Browning had. It was very good. Online right wing, when presented with problems that require practical responses, I'm going to have to theory sell the shit out of this. That was quite entertaining, to say the least. It was very funny. But yeah, so the problems that I think we face in today's world. Member berries are poisonous when eaten in more than 12 servings. Yeah, definitely true. A weighted vest is like a terrible weight holding down our society. Well, you know, the autistic people will manage, I think, at the end of the day. I think we'll do quite all right when it comes to that in that respect. But yeah, so I'm going to stop sharing. Fetch the pliers. Y'all are awful. But then again, right, maybe sometimes that's necessary. You know, sometimes you do need a St. Ambrose of Milan to go tell the emperor to repent, or to get the pliers and tell people to do so. But yes, history as opposed to nostalgia is important for the right, because we have to know where we came from and who we are. Yeah, that's the big takeaway is that history is not nostalgia. And you have to be, I think that the right, more than the left, is historically illiterate, because I think the right is the last group of people that actually read stuff that isn't, my heckin' wholesome material conditions or material, dialectical materialism. So, like, again, reading new books and whatnot definitely matter in that respect. So all the more important for us to be aware of our history and to do what is necessary to work on ourselves in that respect. The subtle art of not giving. Yeah. Oh man. I cannot stand pop psychology in the same way I can't stand like airport books. I'm trying to find one. Oh yeah, like this is the one I pointed out to a few streams ago. It's called "Wrong: Why Experts Keep Failing Us and When to Know Not to Trust Them." And the asterisk says scientists, financial wizards, doctors, relationship gurus, celebrity CEOs, high-powered consultants, health officials, and more. And it's from like I want to say 2010. Yeah, 2010, June 2010. And it's like a really cheap pop, culture book that you would pick up at an airport. And it's a god-awful read, but it's still true in the respect of not to trust those that have gone out of their way to do things like that and whatnot. It's very funny in that respect because it's like, oh, we just threw all that pop culture shit out the window when it came to COVID and things like that. So, it's just a disaster in that respects. So yes, and as I've mentioned earlier, do you think IRL is right-wing midwittery? Well, I would disagree. I mean, to say we have to do things IRL, we gotta be off the internet on the ground. When we reiterate the same talking point that we've been saying for the last like 10 years, then sure. But on the same time, right, what can be made manifest IRL are things like starting businesses together, making sure that you can, have good networks to tell people, hey, if you get fired, here are places that you can go to. Exit and New Founding are excellent examples of this because those guys talk to anons and things like that. And at the same time, right, we also, need to know that we're not alone. Like, it's nice to talk to you all on the internet. And most of you I will never meet in the real world. But for instance, this Tuesday, like I mentioned earlier on the talk, I got to meet Andrew Isker and Boniface at Boniface Option and things like that. And it was just like, oh man, what a desire to do, meet people that and to go have lunch and have friendships and fellowship with people. That it's just like, yes, there's going to be 6 white guys sitting at a barbecue place talking about how screwed up the world is, and we got to avoid those seasoning police, right? Things like that. So all the more important in that respect. But yeah, let's see if the camera, it says my camera's lagging. So here, we'll just go to this. Am I going to Art of Darkness live? You should. I hear it's going to be very keynote. You should. I'm in the Art of Darkness podcast chat, so I should probably look up when they're doing things live. Or yeah. Live show. Yeah, when are they doing a live show? That would be the next question, right? I mean, I know that they're doing. I just started. I'm catching up on some of their episodes. The Marilyn Monroe one was very good. I quite enjoyed their take on it. And I know that they just did a David Foster Wallace episode, which I'm tempted to go and attempted to go and do so and listen to, because I have read Infinite Jest, so let's not. But yeah, I don't know. Where the question, King of Games, is where is it? Because travel for me is the only bit of traveling I'm doing in the near future is going to be to the U.S. event in Nashville later in the summer. I pray that I'll be speaking at this event. I have not heard back. I sent some pitches to speak, so hopefully they accept one of them. When does AA become Darth Vader? Well, I feel like AA has always been Darth Vader in this respect, right? Like, he's learned from the Dark Lord of the Sith, Tony Blair. He worships him, and probably resents him too for ruining Britain. But at the same time, right? That stuff matters. Children of the Ashes says, been working with a friend on the local library to help stock them with some good literature, including a lot of regional poetry as opposed to the mundane pop culture stuff. Refreshing to see less of it. Yeah, nothing is more blackpilling about, like, quote unquote, the literary scene than whatever gets sold at a Books a Million or a Barnes and Noble. Like, if you walk into one, especially right now, it's incredibly depressing. So walk into a Barnes & Noble or a Books a Million, then you're going to have troubles real quick. Yeah, I mean, like on one hand, like for instance, in my area, and not to geographically, I won't dox myself or anything, but in my area, you walk into a Books a Million, which is a discount Barnes and Noble, I suppose, and immediately right in front of you, you've got all this like Wiccan shit, and then on your left there is the coffee shop, Starbucks slop, and a bunch of like female romance fiction stuff, and then there's magazines towards the back. There are like 2 aisles of manga and anime stuff, collectibles, Star Wars toys, and then like maybe a teeny tiny section of shit that's relevant to you. And you're just like, this is the state of culture. Good Lord, Lord have mercy on us. Like, this is how bad it is. Yeah, same here. Excessive liberty is bad. I think it's in June. They're also staging Fitzgerald Winter Dreams. That is in Minnesota. Well, June is also the time of the U.S. event, so I will probably be busy on that respect. So yeah, no. Walking into a coffee shop bookstore is blackpilling indeed. Every book is new, and odds are an LGBT flag will be on the door of the wall. It's disgusting. I've said that the right should take back coffee shops, just because that's where I feel like all the interesting political discussion used to happen, which is really interesting. So I think we've talked about this on other streams, but right wingers should just retake the coffee shop, right? That we should host based book club. Like, all right, 5 guys are going to take up a coffee section. They're going to order their 1 black coffee, maybe sit outside, have a cigarette, and they're all going to talk about, maybe like Bronze Age mindset or Imperium or something, right? And go from there. It's a disaster. Now, used bookstores or locally owned bookstores, depending on who owns them, really does help, right? The new Vienna Coffee House, exactly, right? The witchcraft section is getting bigger than the Christian section. Oh, well, I live well into the Bible Belt in this respect, so I think that that you should keep that in mind, right? Like where I live, it's like Wiccan, Eastern spirituality, witchcraft shit, and then there's like 2 or 3 sections of like just Bible stuff. Like, it's just for the young people and for the boomers, I suppose. In-N-Out burger is our burger. I don't know. It depends on where you live, right? I do not know. So yeah, I don't know. Much like Whataburger, In-N-Out Burger is a great place to go to if you're drunk. A very simplistic menu. A double with fries, wild style is always great, but that's just me. I guess I'm not a fan of the Amish romance genre. I can't say I'm a big fan of cottagecore, I guess, in that respect, or dime store smut cottagecore with female nom de plumes all written by men. So no thanks. Yeah. Whataburger is where it's at. Whataburger, just how you like it. I like how we can bring up fast food chain debates and discussions, because it's very funny where I will normally go to Whataburger if I ever decide to want fast food. I typically don't eat it anymore, and it's really sad. Like I gave it up for Lent last year, and then I've just sort of not eaten there. Although on my way home from Pascha this year, I did stop for a double meat Whataburger with cheese and bacon on it, and decided to just make myself feel sick. Worth it, though. Worth it. Yeah. But Seraphim Goose says, a friend of mine is starting an Orthodox coffee shop / bookstore. I decay about the name, but they're calling it Punks and Monks, inspired by Justin Marler and Death to the World. Well, are those the same guys that own the YouTube channel Punks and Monks? Because they've had the opportunity to record quite a few very good talks from Bishop Gerassim. So good for them. Culver's is peak. There's a Culver's actually that just opened in my area. Enjoy Wisconsin, Midwestern custard and burgers, I suppose. But I'm not. Is this what we're going to do? Is that we're just going to go on a travel log of fast food chains to rank burgers? I feel like this is unpopular opinions tier, things I should be doing or shouldn't be doing with my channel. But then again, I did game on this channel, so it's already like very over for me. But somewhat many such cases, right? But yeah, so those were just the thoughts that I had for you all today. This week, I will have the Digital Archipelago on my channel. We're going to talk about the recent writer's strike and some other great goodness that's going on. And then we will be live later on Saturday. We will be back with a full-on lecture with the Davidson window. And I do make burgers at home, actually. I do a lot of cooking at home. I like baking. I like desserts. And I certainly enjoy making burgers and steaks. Although I'm learning a new recipe for venison steak, which I'm hoping turns out quite well. But my favorite things to do are usually baked desserts. I have a notorious sweet tooth, which I will probably battle for the rest of my life. And I make a mean cheesecake, and my priest loves it. So I've kind of already won in that respect, that the recipe's pretty good. But yeah, that's my that's life there. But that's what I've got for you all today. And so I figured that we would conclude with a little bit of, and so I like to end most of my weekend streams, because I don't have Twitter installed on my phone. We just have them up there on my lovely desktop computer. That's why you'll get the scheduled tweets every day. Short loin is the best steak, bro. But yeah, but venison steak is better. Sorry. Like, just the way that I'm learning how to cook it is fantastic. Cheesecake is immoral. Pie is essential. Pie is great, but I haven't mastered a good lemon meringue recipe, so I will stick to what I'm good at. But yeah. Oh, Lord have mercy. Alrighty, let me get to where I wanted to read for today. So, with that being in mind, here we go. So, today's reading is from the Wisdom of Sirach, or just Sirach, chapter 22, verses 7 through 18. This is one of my favorite books in the Old Testament. I really do love the wisdom books, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, wisdoms of both Solomon and Sirach, but here we go. He who teaches a fool is like one who glues pottery together, or trying to arouse one from a sound sleep. He who tells something to a fool tells it to a drowsy man, and at the end he will say, "What is it?" If children live honestly and have wherewithal, they shall cover the baseness of their parents. But children, being not haughty, through disdain and want of nurture, stain the nobility of their kindred. Weep for a dead man, for he left the light behind. But weep over a fool, for he left intelligence behind. Weep gladly for a dead man, because he is at rest. But the life of a fool is worse than death. The mourning for a dead man lasts 7 days, but the mourning for a fool or an ungodly man lasts all his life. Do not hold a conversation with a fool, and do not visit with a senseless man. Beware of him as to avoid trouble, and you will not be defiled when he shakes himself off. Stay away from him, and you will find rest, and not to be exhausted by his insanity. What will be heavier than lead? What will be his name but fool? Sand, salt, and a piece of iron are easier to bear than a senseless man. A wooden beam bound together in a building will not be broken loose in an earthquake, so a heart strengthened by reasonable counsel will not be afraid in a crisis. The heart settled on an intelligent thought is like plaster decoration on a smooth wall. As fences set on a high place will not stand firm against the wind, so a cowardly heart in the thought of a fool cannot stand firm against any kind of fear. So, in those respects, I hope that we all have a keen way to guard our intellect. I'll actually be writing a little bit about that soon. But, woe to those that have gone down a path of foolishness. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I bid you all a very good rest of your weekend. We will be live again this Thursday. There will be a lot of Substack stuff coming out in the next few days. And I'm trying to shake off a lot of writer's block in that respect. And I will see you all this Thursday and then this Saturday. And I shouldn't be making any other live stream appearances at all anytime soon. So let me just double check entropy before we sign off here. But with that, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you all have a fantastic rest of your weekend. Take care, everyone. We'll see you all live this Thursday with the Digital Archipelago. Be sure to subscribe to the Substack. Your ongoing support on Subscribestar, channel memberships, Buy Me a Coffee, and the merchandise is always fantastic. That's why you should take advantage of our lovely mugs for Frog of the Week and more. And take care, and God bless. Be prudent, everyone.